Okay, everyone, so we're having technical difficulties, so we're just going to do it over the phone, kind of like the radio style they used to do back in the olden days, I'm sure. It'll be fun. So, Renee, you are in beginning intro to fashion. A lot of these students have not taken fashion classes before, but we're learning about all sorts of different careers. And they're going to take notes, and they get to write a little paper about you as well. And what I want them to learn from you is just, like how you got your start and what was a typical day like at Coach. They've had guest speakers a lot from the surf industry, but they've never had anyone from a luxury brand or New York. So I'm going to be interesting to see if there's any differences. So,
Okay. Well, let me first talk about my background. I'm originally from Northern California. I'm from the Central Valley. Near Modesto, and I went to college at UC Davis.
Here, hold on, Renee.
So I'm from near Modesto, and I studied design at UC Davis, with Tyler. And then after college, about a year after college, I picked up and I moved to New York City, and I moved there without a job. And the industry, there's a lot of fashion companies in New York City. There's a lot of small companies and there's a lot of big companies.
Wait, hold on real quick, Renee. Sorry, one thing. You moved to New York without having a job. I just want them to think about that. So how did you?
Yes, I moved there without a job. I didn't have a whole lot of money saved up. I think at the time I had about $1,000 saved up, which to me seemed like a lot. But now, knowing how expensive everything is in New York, I really should have had a lot more money. I just kind of went there prematurely.
Wow.
And it was tough. The point is that it was pretty tough. But the good thing is that there's a lot of job opportunities there in fashion design. There is a whole area called the Garment District, which is in the dead center of Lower Manhattan. That's just all fashion companies. And like I said, it's a mix of some really big brands in New York, like Marc Jacobs, DKNY, Tory Burch, Michael Kors, Coach, Macy's headquarters are there, J. Crew, Ralph Lauren, Andrew Mark, Toomey. There's a lot of big companies there.
So when you went there, Renee, you had no experience, right? You just had your degree in design from UC Davis.
Yes.
But did you have internships?
Yeah. I had one internship in college. I worked for a really small mom and pop company out of their house, working on dog accessories, so pet accessories, and that was a great experience. I think any internship is a really good experience. Because I was able to sew and understand construction of these pet accessories. Also, we did our own production inside their home, inside the garage. So to see how we had to go from start to finish, from getting materials, purchasing large quantities of materials, laying all the materials out, cutting, sewing, labeling them with tags, and packaging them and putting them into boxes. It was all start to finish. We did this in a little garage, and so that was a really good opportunity to see that. But the only thing is that, unfortunately, a lot of the people that I was competing with in New York City for jobs had internships at places like Coach and DKNY. So there's a lot of competition in New York. There's quite a few big fashion colleges there, like FIT, Pratt, the New School of Design, and a lot of people they travel from all over the world to go to college there. So it was. I don't want to lie and say it wasn't tough. It was very tough because there was a lot of competition.
So how'd you do it?
I basically started from the bottom and worked my way up. I got my first job at a very small clothing company working in juniors' prom dresses, and I was an assistant designer there, and I really didn't do any design in that assistant role. I really just did just kind of whatever work needed to be done in the office. So I was, like folding fabrics. I was organizing meetings, running out to get coffee. I was doing whatever they needed me to do, and that was fine. That's what I had to do. And that position did not pay a whole lot of money, so I did have a job on the side. I was waitressing, I was hostessing on the side, and I did that for a couple years. Eventually, they laid me off because the company didn't have any money, but at least I had some sort of work experience under my belt. And from there, I went to a recruiting office, and they were able to give me some freelance work. As a freelance designer, a lot of times they need people to come into the office and do all sorts of tasks. And it could be anything from running out to get coffee and, folding fabric, like I said, that I did on my previous job, or it could be things like drawing in Illustrator or drawing hand sketches or, doing some random labor like, scanning in images, things like that. The good thing about freelance work is that there's a lot of it to be done because a lot of fashion companies, there seems to be a lot of crunch time. Everywhere that I've worked, there always seems to be time at the end of the season where you need to get materials and products and design information out to your factories. And if you don't get it to your factories in time, then you're going to have a hard time getting the product into stores on time, which is always very, very important. So when it comes to that crunch time, they need extra helping hands, so they hire a lot of freelance designers. I was fortunate enough to be put on an assignment at J. Crew, and the assignment was for 3 days. And I went there for 3 days, and I was scanning images. That's all I had to do. They needed to get some images into the computer, and they had hundreds of them, and they needed some help. So I sat around for 3 days just scanning images. While I was there, I started chatting with one of the designers, and him and I built a rapport together. We just, got along very well, and I was there for 3 days, and then I left. Well, eventually down the road, about a month later, J. Crew needed another person to help out with another design job. This was actually sketching. So since I had already met this designer and I talked with him, he had requested that I be the one that comes from the agency. So I went over there to work with J. Crew on another project, and that project ended up turning into a 1.5-year project. So it was just by luck that I was able to go in for a short-term project, and it ended up being long-term. J. Crew was a great company to work for. This was years ago. It was probably about 8 years ago that I worked for J. Crew, and the company was really growing in size at that point in time. Also, I think they were changing a bit of their design aesthetic from being really preppy to only semi-preppy and being a little bit more fashion-y. And they were growing the business, so they needed help because they needed to turn around more product, and so I was very valuable being there. I really learned a lot about accessories because I was working in the men's accessories team. I learned about how to design belts, bags, wallets, do patterns and prints for ties and socks. And also, that's when I really began to utilize my Illustrator skills, my Adobe Illustrator skills. And my boss at the time, he's the one who kind of taught me a lot of little quick tricks to getting Illustrator tech packs done quickly. Which is important because there's a lot of things you can do in Photoshop and Illustrator, but what I found being a designer is that there's only a handful of tools within Illustrator and Photoshop that you really use and that you use a lot, so you should really learn to use them well and fast. So that's where I learned most of my Illustrator skills. Then once I had J. Crew on my resume, I started to apply to a few other jobs because, truthfully, I was looking to make a little bit more money. I wasn't making a whole lot of money at J. Crew. I still had a second job. I worked full-time at J. Crew, 40 hours a week, and then I also waitressed. But I was looking to only have one job, so I started reaching out to see if there were any other companies who possibly paid a little bit more money. And I had Coach reach out to me. I actually went to a fashion career fair. I went in there with an updated portfolio with my J. Crew products that I had worked on, with resumes. I went in there looking very fun, fashionable. I like to say when I present myself at something like a recruiting fair, I want to look memorable, because there's just so many people that are there. You want to go in and you want to, a lot of times they're going to remember your portfolio, and they're going to remember your face, because they're looking at a lot of faces. I went in there and I looked very professional, but looked hip. I looked current. I think a lot of companies, they don't want someone to look like they don't want to hire someone who comes in a business suit, because the fashion industry is not a business suit type of world. But they don't want someone coming in and flip flops and super casual clothes, because if you have to present yourself as professional. So when I was at this recruiting fair, I made sure I got some face-to-face time with one of the Coach HR recruiters, and luckily they contacted me. I went in for a couple rounds of interviews, and once again I began freelancing for Coach, and that started out as a short-time freelance position, which eventually turned into a 1.5 year long freelance position. So I was paid hourly without health benefits for about 1.5 years. And after being there for that long, finally the company said, we want to bring you on full-time salary. We want to give you health benefits. We want to give you stock options. We want to give you, a year-end bonus. And that was great. So I've been at Coach for about 8 years now. And I worked only in men's accessories, and the first year or so I did belts, wallets, some small leather goods, so a lot of leather items that were smaller in scale. Coach really wants the accessory designers to learn the aesthetic and learn the materials that you're working with, learn about the heritage of the brand, the leather qualities, because Coach is a leather company. So I did that, did the smaller items for the first year, and then you move into bags, because bags are a lot more complicated, and especially at the level of Coach. They pride themselves on having, the best durability to their bags, and, all of Coach bags have a lifetime warranty, and so you have to learn how to construct these bags in a certain way that they will last a very long time. So once you kind of get your feet wet at Coach, and then move you into the bag world as a designer. And so most of my history there has been working on bags. And I was in the business and travel division, which is technically the men's division, but we did, a lot. Obviously we did the man bags, which everyone kind of jokes about, but we also did all sorts of computer bags, gym bags, messenger bags, travel bags, so like anything that you would put on the plane, so wheel along luggage, backpacks, lots of backpacks. In the last couple of years, backpacks have been blowing up, so we've tried all sorts of different constructions and techniques with backpacks. Coach was a great company to work for, because since they did specialize in accessories, you really learned a lot just about accessories, and they spent a lot of time training you, sending you to classes and sitting down with engineers to really learn just about bags. Whereas when I was at J. Crew, J. Crew is a clothing company that happens to sell accessories. And so, their focus is to make sure that the clothing looks great. And as an accessory designer at J. Crew, it was a lot of trial and error from my point of view, because we didn't know how to design accessories well. And then, on the opposite end of the spectrum, Coach has been doing it for so long that they have a team of people that says, this is how you need to do it. Designers, you just kind of need to lay out like the aesthetics and how you want it to look, and we'll train you on how to get it to, to be the best product that it is.
So,
let's see. All in all, any questions, Skyla?
Yeah, how many seasons would you say you designed at Coach, and like how many styles per season? And like, what was it really like designing for them? Like, did you have to do like research and just find inspiration samples and sketch it, or did you have to create the tech pack? Or I don't know if you just want to talk a little bit about the design process there.
Sure, process. So there was 4 seasons a year, and we had product going into the stores at the beginning of each month. So we would kind of organize it and design it by season, and then we would then narrow it down, the assortment as to what goes into stores when, based off of, sales from years prior, as well as based off of holidays, and not just holidays like Christmas and Thanksgiving, but holidays like, back to school time and, Father's Day. Those are big holidays for us because that's when people go into stores and they buy bags. The design process, it starts off, it's conceptual. First off, we would come up with a concept board, which would be based off of images as to who our customer is and what we saw the color palette to be for the season. And then from there, we would come up with some ideas for bags. Now, when I first started at Coach, we would really only design a handful of bags each season. There was only me and one other designer, and we would come up with maybe about 20 different bags a season, maybe 30, and then we would narrow it down to only like about 5. Wow. That's not the same when you walked into the store. The men's kind of division only had 5 bags. It was just that those are 5 bags that we were layering on top of maybe the already existing 10 or 15 that were in the stores. But when I first started, there weren't a whole lot of requests for bags. The great thing about Coach is that we had a sample making facility in our building in New York. So we would actually, our building is 12 floors. We would go down to the basement, and there was an entire sample room where there's people sewing bags and hand stitching them and sewing them on sewing machines and creating the patterns from scratch for the flat patterns to cut the materials. That was really cool for me as a designer to go in there. If I was working on a bag, I would send down a tech pack, and I would go down there and I could actually see my sample being made. The important part of this is that is actually very expensive for Coach to keep that sample facility in New York City because they have to pay American wages. They have to pay New York wages to get people to keep that sample room running. So we had limited, we could only sample so many bags in that sample facility in New York, and I think that's why when we first started off, we sampled so few bags. The way that we would create our tech packs, we would basically come up with a concept of, who the man was, what bags he was wearing for the season, the color palette. And then we would do some hand sketches, just kind of quick hand sketches as, what are we thinking? And then we'd have our bosses kind of look over our shoulder and say, I like this, I like that. Let's make a sample. And we would do all of our tech pack. We would go to make a sample, we create a tech pack, and we did it all in Illustrator. Just using black and white lines and specking out all the dimensions of every angle of the bag. Coach is very detailed. We would even talk about the gauge of the stitch. We would talk about the stitches per inch. Also, since we use leather, the edges of the leather need to be called out if it's a turned edge or if it's a raw edge, which just means it's just cut. We also have to call out if we're going to put edge paint on this raw edge. So it's very detailed, our tech packs, by the time they would get down to the sample room. But once we would send it down, we would actually sit by the pattern maker downstairs in the basement, and we would watch them make the bag. The good thing about that is that you begin to learn the shapes of pattern pieces, what the pattern shape of a handle looks like. And I began to learn that certain shapes would create different dimensions once it was constructed. So I was able to advise the pattern maker then what to do, how to get the achieved look by the time that it was constructed. So we would come up with we'd come up with samples, and if we didn't like the way the sample looked or we didn't like the shape of the way it kind of hang or hung. A lot of times, it's a lot of playing with materials. Sometimes you use a leather that may be too thin, and you get the bag, and it just kind of just is, looks like a towel. It's just dead and doesn't have any, life to it. So then we'd have to figure out, what do we do to give it some structure? Do we add filler to the back of the leather? Meaning, do you bond it to some sort of, kind of lightweight material that'll help give it shape? Or do you use a completely different material altogether? Or do you redesign it so that it has a different construction? So you play around with that, and you get a couple samples. And eventually, by the time you got a couple samples, you would work with your merchandisers to decide what product would end up getting adopted into the store. For us at Coach, when it was that early on and we couldn't afford to make a lot of samples, we would usually just do one sample, one golden sample, that's what we called it. And then once we decided that it would go into the stores, we would then put it in a lot of different colors. But we never would actually prototype that sample in all the different colors because it was too expensive. We would do those illustrations in Illustrator where if we did have this one golden sample, let's say we made a black gym bag, and we knew that we were going to adopt it, put it in the stores, and eventually put that gym bag in red, yellow, and green. What I would do is then I would draw it in Adobe Illustrator I would do it from like a 3/4 view angle, and then I would scan in the materials. I would scan in the leather, or I would scan in the nylon, whatever it was. I would scan it in to the computer, and I would drop that material into the bag so that I would have kind of, a general idea of what that bag would end up looking like in those colors. And I would pass those over to the rest of my team so that they visually knew the products that I was working on and how they were going to look in the stores.
Renee, can I interrupt you real quick? Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
So you talk a lot about designing for the store. So the merchandisers and buyers, were those two different positions? Like, did the buyers ever request stuff from you, or was it strictly the merchandisers? And then did other stores buy from you guys, like Neiman Marcus, or was that just not even your concern? That was a whole different department.
Well, so merchandisers and buyers are basically the same thing. The merchandisers, I kind of use the term buyer loosely, meaning like I was just using it because it's easier to understand. But we really didn't have any buyers at Coach. We just only had merchandisers, and the merchandisers' roles were to figure out the best way for the company to get the correct product in the stores. And when I say correct, I'm talking about like based off of research and looking at trends and looking at how, like, what is selling in the market, what's selling in competitive markets and what's selling for Coach, how to get that correct product in the stores so that Coach can make the most money. Now, the most important thing I need to call out about working for a fashion company, any company that's not your own, is that the goal is to make money. And you can design the most amazing, beautiful bag, and you can love it, and all your friends can love it, but if no one else buys it, there's no way it's going to go in the stores. And if the bag itself, when you figure out the actual cost of the bag, so how much it costs to make the bag after you go through production, if that cost is too high for what would go into the retail store, so this is where margin comes into play. If the margin isn't good on the bag or the product, it won't go into stores because the goal is to make money. So the merchandising team would figure out the best way that we can make money, and it would give us basically a template each season of how many bags they wanted in which stores and kind of give us a generic styling of the bags. And it's also important to call out that even though, we all walk into Coach stores in the United States, like that product is specifically designed for those specific stores in the United States. for example, there's, like 5 Coach stores in New York City, and the Coach store in Soho has different products than the Coach store that's in Times Square, and it's because that's different customers, and the merchandisers have done research to figure out what those customers want. So how do you refill and restock the store with the best merchandise so that it will sell? And then that product is completely different from the product that's sold over in Europe. So the merchandiser's role is to do a lot of research and do a lot of analyzation as to how we can make the most money by selling certain products at a certain time of year. And then what they do is that they filter that information down to us designers, and our job then is to make the bags, make the product. And then in the end, when, at the end of each season, when we have all of these prototypes and bags, the merchants will look at the assortment and say, okay, we like this, we like that. And like I said before, a lot of times there's amazing bags, and a lot of times some of us designers don't agree with the merchandisers on what they decide to adopt. But it really gets, when it comes down to it, it's all about making the most money possible. And in terms of selling to other companies like Coach, being in Neiman Marcus or Coach selling inside of Macy's, that was done through a different role. We did sell to them, but I think that, that's so beyond what I even know. We would sell to them, but I think that the margins had to be a little bit more aggressive. So a lot of times the product was really limited as to what we could sell in those stores versus what we could sell in our full price stores.
Okay, so it's not like you design something special for them. So
I think that may have been more of a buy. I think that maybe that's where the buying and the merchandising kind of differentiates itself. But us designers, we never really the only people we interacted with were our merchants, and that's it.
Okay.
If that answers you, Kyla.
Yeah, definitely.
Another thing to call out that's important is at Coach we have a full price Coach. So that's all the stores that you see wherever, on the streets and mall, and then there's factory stores, which you only see it out at factory stores. Factory store product is designed in the New York offices, but the product is specifically designed for factory store. So what I mean by that is a lot of times people thought that we designed all this product at full price and we couldn't sell it, so then we would just give it to factory store. Well, that's not the truth, because if you really think about it, that's actually wasting a lot of money. If we design and produce so much product that wasn't sold, then we weren't a smart business. So what we would do is a lot of times when you go into production, so you decide what bags you're going to make, you send all the materials over to Asia, which is where we do our production. A lot of times there's leftover materials because it's better to have leftover materials instead of not enough materials. So a lot of times we would have leftover materials. What factory store did was would take these leftover materials and basically make kind of leftover bags. But it was more in detail than that. They would actually, factory store product uses cheaper hardware. It's all cheaper materials in general, so that by the time the product gets into the store, it's actually a much less expensive version than the bag in full price. And once again, it has to do with margin. It has to do with what factory store is selling the price of the bags for and the margin. I think that's important to call out because it kind of gives you a better understanding of the business. That if we were to design all this great product and we just didn't sell it and then we slash the prices, we'd be losing out on a lot of money. But really, what we're doing is we're using leftover materials, we're using less expensive materials, and we're creating a bag that's almost similar to the bag that was in full price, but the margin is much higher. And so Coach as a company makes a lot of money off a factory store product because the margin and the price point is, and the margin's so high, and we make so much money in comparison to the cost of the bag.
So Renee, can I ask you a question? Would you say it's kind of like two different lines, basically, but do they both have the same label, right?
It's two different lines. Even though we're designed in the same building, it's two different lines with the same label. The thing is, it makes a lot of sense. When Coach opened up factory store, I think a lot of people at the time were kind of shocked. They opened up factory store, I don't know how many years ago, maybe about 7 years ago or so. And I think a lot of people were shocked that Coach would actually go that route. But it was really smart because they'd already had brand identity. People loved the product. A lot of people, are, a lot of people, that's all they buy. And so knowing that, they have brand recognition, you see a bag and you see the Coach label on it and you say, ooh, I love this product.
Yeah.
And you want to buy it. And, oh, wait a minute, I can get it super cheap at factory store, then great. So it brought a lot of people in. So, but yeah, that's essentially what it is. It's two different lines, but just with the same label on it. Now, that's not to say that, you shouldn't go to Coach and buy, a factory bag, because it's, a lot of times it's the same good materials. It's just, the thing is that it's kind of like leftover materials that just went unused, and the bags are a little bit more simplistic. Like, you're not going to get a lot of the fancy linings or the fancy interior pockets, things like that. And you're probably going to get it about 9 months late. Which, if you're fine with that, then it's fine.
Can I ask you another question? Didn't you get to help out in a commercial for Japan or something? I don't know. Do you want to talk about that?
I did.
What was that about?
I did. What was that? Well, Japan, so Asia, well, actually, Japan in general. The country Japan buys a lot of Coach product, and we make a lot of money there. And so we spend a lot of money doing research as to trends that are going on there, what people are buying. We really kind of specialize a lot of our design just for Japan, because we know that people, will spend a lot of money there. Americans will probably never see most of the product that we design for them. But we were in a lot of, just in general, we would buy a lot of ad space in Japanese magazines, in, side of buses, advertisements on buildings, things like that. I went over to Japan for work a couple of years ago, and the presence at Coach is really insane. We have one store in Tokyo that's huge. It's like the size of a mall, but it's just a Coach store, and it has all neon lights and with all C's across it, and the place is nuts. It's packed. So anyway, so there's a big presence of Coach in Japan, and they did a commercial for for Coach's product, which may seem a bit odd because no one here in America has ever seen a Coach commercial like on TV, but we did one for Japan, and the way that it was filmed was they came into the New York offices, they showed the sample room of them cutting the materials, sewing the bags, and then they brought the cameras into my office, and me and some of the other designers, we sat down and we just started sketching. We started looking at materials, acted as if the cameras weren't there, even though we all got very dulled up that day for the TV commercial.
Yeah.
And then they filmed us, and then eventually it turned into a commercial for Japanese TV. And I can see if I have that, Kyla. I can see if I can send it to you.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
The funny thing is that it's all in Japanese, so I don't know what they're saying.
That's so funny. Cool. Can you also?
And actually, it was.
Yeah.
It was going to say it was specifically done for men's Coach, so that's why they came in to film our team. And another thing to call out, my team was really small. But the women's division is huge. I mean, there's like 50 designers, which is kind of unheard of for most fashion companies. Most fashion companies don't have that many designers, but the women's team has a lot of designers. And it makes sense because what they do is they narrow it down by the different divisions that are within women's handbags. So there's women's clutches, there's women's hobos, women's totes, women's, evening bags. There's so many different divisions in women's. And like I said, Coach really tries to train you and educate you on making the best product. And so you're really specialized in what you do there, because they really want you to be the master in design at that one specialty.
Can you tell us?
That makes sense.
Yeah. Can you talk about what was your favorite part of your job there, and what was your least favorite part?
My favorite part of the job was definitely traveling, because I love to travel. I got an opportunity to go to the factories over in Asia, which was a really great experience. I think that a lot of times people think that just because we do production in Asia, that the factories are that they imagine these sweatshops. But it's a better way of looking at it is it's more like kind of college. It's the sweatshops were, the sweatshops. The production facilities looked basically like a campus. You would go there, and they had these big kind of, like classrooms, and in each of the classrooms, what they do is they train you on certain aspects of making bags. Now, the factories that we were working with were bag factories. I'm sure if you went to a clothing company, it would be the same thing for making clothes. But what they did is, they specialized on training people on how to, make patterns, make flat patterns, cut materials, how to sew and construct them. And it was and people had friends who they worked with there at the factories. And they had a cafeteria, and they had a dorm in which they stayed in. And they had events at nighttime, It was a really cool experience, and I got to see, I was able to, kind of watch a lot of my products go through production, and that was really cool. It was also great to just, be out of the office and be somewhere else. Because it was, once you get used to being somewhere 40 to 50 hours a week, it's just visually stimulating to just, see something else. Also, I had the opportunity to go to Italy, and I visited the tanneries that we worked with in Italy, so where we got our leather. And luckily, I was raised on a farm, so I have a pretty strong stomach. But you would see, from start to finish, the cow, basically the cow's skin, because leather is a byproduct of meat. You would see start with the raw material of the skin, the hide. And like I said, I have a strong stomach because it smells pretty bad in the tanneries, but you get past it. And you saw them take these leathers or take the skin and just convert it into a leather, which was a really interesting process. They threw the skins in this tumbler, this big, almost like washing machine. Imagine a washing machine, it's the size of this room that I'm in, and they threw these skins in there, and the way that it would, first thing that it did was it had to get the hair off of the skin, and it was almost like they used this heavy-duty nair. So that was the way that it started, and then from there, they would have to put it through like a rolling machine, almost like when you're rolling out cookie dough to kind of thin it out and make it smooth. They would go through a rolling machine, and then they would dye it, and then they would polish it. Anyway, it's a very long process, but to visually see it off from start to finish, it was really very interesting. And I went around to 5 different factories in Bologna, Italy. And the factories are all owned by these old school Italian families. And when I came in to the factories, they treated me as if I was family, even though I had never met them before. And they served me, cappuccinos and prosciutto, and at night, not even nighttime, it was like 3 p.m. and they were serving me wine. We were still working, but it's okay because that's the culture and that's what you do. So that was a great experience. That was my favorite part. My least favorite part is designing bags at Coach. Everything has to be filtered through several layers of people. It has to be, everything has to be reviewed with, my supervisors, and then the merchants, and then there is the senior creative director who would his name was Reed Krakoff, and I'm not sure if anyone knows his name. He has his own line now, but I worked with Reed for a long time, and he is a great guy to work with, but he has the final say on everything. And I think what's difficult is seeing a great bag that you feel really passionate about, that you after working there as long as I have, I felt like I really knew who the customer was, and I had done so much research to fully understand who the customer was, and so I felt like I designed a great bag. It was in the price point that it needed to be in. The colors looked great, and then to get the idea completely just knocked out. Basically, it just, they said, nope, we can't do this, and it would drop. That was always really unfortunate. The only rewarding thing about that is then you have leftover samples, and those are samples that I got to keep.
Well, that's good.
Cool. So I have a lot of bag samples, and so do all my friends.
Awesome. I want to ask you one more question, and then I was going to let the students ask you questions. Do you have words of advice for people just getting their start? Like, should they go to school? Should they learn computer programs? Should they do internships? Or, I don't know, any advice at all for newbies?
Yes, I do. I do have some advice. I went to Davis, and I got my 4-year degree, and it was amazing, and I met great people like Kyla, and I would love to go back tomorrow and do it all over again. But that being said, you don't have to go to these fancy schools. You don't have to go, I was talking about these fancy schools in New York City. You really don't have to go there. I mean, a lot of the people that I worked with at Coach had an interesting mix of, fancy schools, even over in, Paris and London. They have, this amazing training, but then some people were just really creative, and all they had was, a high school degree. And I think that if you're creative and you're a hard worker and you're willing to hustle, meaning you're willing to, understand that an entry-level position is better than no position, and doing whatever you need to do to, kind of prove yourself. If you're willing to do that, then I think that's the best attitude to have. I think a lot of people when they heard my stories about moving to New York and not having any money and working, 3 jobs at a time, they said that must have been so hard. And my comment was, hard work was never the issue. I didn't mind working my ass off. I think the toughest thing was just someone giving me the opportunity to just someone inviting me in for an interview. That was the tough part, because there's so many people that you're competing with. So if you can, network, meet people, build a good rapport with anyone who's in the industry, smile, treat them well, follow up if they happen to say they may know of a job opportunity, just to get your foot in the door somewhere is the best start. And then just work as hard as you possibly can. And then, like I said, and hustle. I think that's the best advice that I could give. Also, computer programs. That's pretty important. What I'm noticing is that people who are coming into the industry, out of college, the downside of them is that they don't have industry experience. But the great thing is that they do have a lot more computer skills than people me and Kyla's age and my supervisors. Like, my supervisors have no idea how to use Photoshop and Illustrator because they just weren't grown up in that environment. they weren't trained on it, and in their roles now, there's no reason for them to be trained on it. But if you can not only become a master at Photoshop and Illustrator, but some of these three-dimensional programs, I think that would put you, way ahead of the curve than everyone else. So,
wait, Renee, you mentioned three-dimensional programs. What three-dimensional programs are you talking about? Did you guys use that at Coach, or is it like pattern making software, or?
Yeah, there's a pattern making program called Optitex. I think only if you plan on being a pattern maker, you would need to know that. But there's a couple. That's the thing. I don't even know the names of the programs.
Someone told me one called SolidWorks. I don't know if that rings a bell.
Yes, SolidWorks. And SolidWorks is. I've seen some people using it in the office, and it looks pretty complicated.
Okay.
But if you can figure out how to use it, it's great, because what you do is you can input all the dimensions of the bag, the corner radiuses of the bag. You can, put in, the raw edge versus the turned edge of materials, stitching, scan in the materials, and then you can do a 3D. You can literally take the three-dimensional image and rotate it. You can look at it from the top, from the bottom. It visually, it looks like the real thing. I mean, for us, for bags, it would work, because we need to see things in 3 dimensions. I don't know how much more important that would be for clothing, but for bags, it's pretty important. And I don't know how to use it, and I think that, the more people that come in and know how to use it, and it looks pretty complicated, but if people can, design a bag fast that way, then I think that would be a great skill to have for the industry. So what was it called? SolidWorks?
So that's cool you said that, because I had a student of mine. She actually went to FITM, and she was just taking classes to continue to learn. So she's taking sewing here and a textiles class, and she was taking SolidWorks in the manufacturing department. And she said how she was there's only 2 girls in the class, and the rest were guys, and it's for manufacturing. And she thought it'd be cool to learn maybe for furniture design, but as she was learning it, she was telling me that we should do an accessory design class around it. So I think that's cool that you have seen that a little bit in the industry.
Definitely. And if you guys do doing something like that, I think using the images from SolidWorks, putting them in your portfolio would be very important, because that's another thing, talking about a portfolio. I think some key things for a portfolio that I found, and it's funny, when I first started in the industry, I had no idea what to put in my portfolio. I was clueless, and then the more that you interview, the more you get feedback from the people you're interviewing with. So I think, from my experience, it's important to have pieces that are eye-catching, so visually look cool, but also that you can talk about and maybe have a story behind. I think maybe early on in entry-level design position, you won't have too many stories. Meaning, for me, I can talk a lot about the history of a bag, why the bag was initially requested by my merchants, and maybe some problems we had, and how I solved that problem at the production level, and it ended up becoming a bestseller. I can talk about that stuff. I can talk about because I have experience, but if you're just starting out and putting your portfolio together, like I said, something that's eye-catching, then maybe you say, hey, I was, at this, I don't know, I was at a vintage show, or I was at a street fair, and I found this really cool rug, and I really liked the print of it. And so I went back into Illustrator, and I, redid this vintage print in a couple different updated colorways, and I plopped it into this cool design of a bag, and this is the outcome. Anyway, stories like that I think are good, because it allows people to it allows people that you're interviewing with, the recruiter or the HR person, like I said, memorable. You want to be memorable, because they're meeting a lot of people, and so I think, like I said, having also another thing about portfolios, a lot of times I'll put in actual pieces of materials that I can literally reach into my portfolio and pull out for people to touch. I think that's also good.
That's cool. All right, I'm going to open it up to questions. Does anyone want to ask Renee a question? Shy. No, do you think she covered it? Yeah? Okay.
How many Coach bags does she have?
He wants to know, how many Coach bags do you have?
Oh, good God. I don't know. Maybe about, maybe 50.
Oh, gosh. Awesome. Anybody? Yeah, Ingrid. Go ahead.
Do you have any questions, Carla? Any other
Yes.
questions?
Yeah, Ingrid has one. Go ahead, Ingrid.
Okay.
You mentioned that you have 2 different lines for the factory store. What do you
Yes.
do with the bags in the full price store that you don't sell for that season? Let's say they went on sale, but you still have some leftovers. What do you do with those bags?
So full price Coach bags actually never go on sale, believe it or not. Unless you're at a place like Macy's or Neiman Marcus, if they go on sale there, it's different from if the bags go on sale in the Coach store, because Macy's is then losing money from their own pocket. But Coach and the stores will actually never put bags on sale. We will put shoes on sale. I don't know why. But bags will never go on sale. What they do is they actually go back to our factory. We have a factory in Florida, Jacksonville, Florida. They'll go there, and they actually are kind of sold off either at sample sale level just for Coach employees, or they're given at employees can buy them at a discount. And then maybe sometimes they go to factory store. Only about 5% of the product in factory store is stuff that doesn't sell in Coach stores, because they really want to make sure that they differentiate the product. Because the goal is they want customers to buy from full price first. So that's why they differentiate the product.
Very cool.
If that makes sense. Yeah.
All right. Anybody else?
Is she still with Coach?
No, actually, Renee just moved to San Francisco, so we caught her in between. She's going to start Old Navy next week.
Yes, I'm starting at Old Navy Design next week. Yeah, bag and accessories. So keep your eyeballs peeled if you guys start seeing some Coach-esque looking bags at Old Navy.
So,
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Renee, so now that, Coach obviously is a great company. Why did you decide to leave Coach and go to Old Navy? Something probably different, right?
Yes, something totally different. Well, I had been at Coach for, 8.5 years, and I was ready to get back to California, and I wanted to be in Northern California, and there are only a handful of corporate offices here in Northern California. The Gap corporate is one of them, and Old Navy is a growing business right now. They're actually, believe it or not, they are just Old Navy, not Gap, but Old Navy is twice the size of Coach. But Old Navy is owned by Gap, and Gap now owns quite a few different companies. So Gap is trying to really expand its portfolio. They own Gap, they own Banana, they own Intermix, they own Hyper Line, and they also own a company called Athletic. It's like a women's, kind of like their version of like Lululemon. Anyway, growing business. They're looking to expand their accessories. Most companies nowadays are looking to expand accessories because they're finding that a lot of times people go into stores and they don't want to commit to buying, clothing, outerwear, things like that. Or usually a little bit more expensive, but you can buy small pieces to jazz up your outerwear. It's easy sales. So I wanted to get back to Northern California, and I saw a good opportunity with Old Navy, and after going to view their offices, it seems to have a really good, healthy work environment. Another bad thing about working in New York is it's a very, working in New York City kind of is like the Devil Wears Prada. It's, it's kind of a rat race. It's go, go, go. It sometimes can be a bit pretentious, and I was kind of ready for a change. In California, it's a lot more laid back. The offices that I will be working at Old Navy are kind of similar to Google offices, where it's like a campus with all open air and like a quad and a cafeteria where I can get free food and I can get free coffees, and I'm really excited about my free coffee every day. And it's right on the water here in San Francisco. So yeah, I think it's a really healthy work environment. For me personally, it's not so much about the brand name and staying with like a, kind of more of it wasn't important. It's not as important for me to stay with a high-end product, I think, as much as people would think it is. For me, it's just working with a really good team of people and being in a place where I can be really happy every day, and a place where the company is large enough that I know that I can grow with the company, meaning there is an opportunity for me to get promoted in the next year. Like, that's very important to me, because I definitely don't want to stay stagnant. I don't want to be doing the same thing year after year. And I definitely, now after being in the industry for 11 years, I've definitely grown, and I've been promoted several times, and that's exciting. And along with the promotion, not only comes money, which is awesome, but also it's change. You get different roles and responsibilities, and that's exciting. So for me, it's tough for me to ever go back working for a small company. Like I said, when I first started in New York, I worked for a really small company, and that was great because it was entry level. But there were so few roles and jobs within that company that I would have been doing the exact same thing every single day for 20 years if I would have stayed there. So for me, it's important to be able to grow with a company.
Cool. Any other questions, you guys? Okay, go. Renee, thank you so much for being our very first virtual guest speaker and spending the past hour or so with us. Anyways, how's the weather up there?
It's gorgeous. It's like 75 and sunny. It's beautiful here. In New York, it would be shitty.
Well, I hope you have a great day, and happy Halloween, by the way, too. So, all right. Thanks.
And you know what, Kyla? I just thought of something. What? I have a bunch of travel bags and backpacks in Dropbox. Why don't I send you the link for that? And if you want to pull up some stuff that
okay.
It's just like a few images that I had when I've been interviewing for some jobs. I put it in Dropbox, and you can just pull it up and show everyone kind of my drawing.
Cool, that'd be awesome. Okay, thank you. Okay. Thanks, Renee.
Okay, you're welcome. All right, bye everyone.
Bye.
Good luck with everything. Bye.
Bye. Yay. Okay.